everyone, my name is Julia Jacobsen, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about TwoSetViolin and the online classical music community. Just in case you're new here, I make videos about classical music, college, and lifestyle, and I would love to see my face in your subscription box. Also, if you hear any weird background noises, there's two different noises happening right now. There's my diffuser, and there is the outside world that is a busy street outside of my dorm. So if you hear that, I'm sorry. Before I go into TwoSetViolin and how they've affected the classical music community, I want to talk a little bit about my experience with TwoSet and also playing the violin in general. I began playing the violin 7 years ago when I was in the 6th grade in my middle school orchestra program. And for most of the time that I was playing violin, I knew about TwoSet and I really enjoyed their videos a lot. I decided roughly in the middle of high school that I wanted to pursue violin professionally, and now I'm a freshman violin performance major in university. TwoSet has been my primary source for musician-related comedic content, and a lot of my friends really enjoy watching TwoSet too, so it's just this big community that I'm in that loves TwoSet. I started watching TwoSet before I was really serious about violin, and now that I am serious, I'm still watching them and I still love them, and now I'm pursuing violin as a career. Now, just for a little bit of a timeline, TwoSetViolin sort of gained popularity starting in about 2015, and they've been growing so much from there. Their content is mostly classical music related, and they interlace a lot of funny things, a lot of interesting and informative things into their videos about the classical music world. Now, let's get a little bit more serious for a second. There is a larger issue at stake when it comes to classical music in today's world. Many people view the world of classical music as a dying genre that is getting less and less popular as the people who grew up in the early 20th century are getting older and older. This association with antiquity has made a lot of people think that classical music is boring and uninteresting. Classical music has been lacking a solid connection with the youth of today's world, which it really needs in order for it to be secure for the next lifetime. TwoSet has removed a lot of the stigma that classical music is perceived to have among the youth, and they've presented it as a fun and interesting genre of music that has so much depth to it. And basically, what I'm talking about today is how TwoSet has removed that stigma and connected with younger audiences to spread the joy of classical music to lots of people and hopefully secure classical music with its connection to the digital space. So, what does make TwoSet different from other big musicians on the internet? What's interesting about TwoSet is that through the years, they've continued to maintain their focus on classical music, and they've built their audience around classical music, which is different from a lot of other violinists. There's many modern violinists that were classically trained but decided to go to different genres that are arguably easier to be successful in than classical music because those genres are currently more popular than classical music. For example, Lindsay Sterling. She's a classically trained violinist, but she decided to go into other genres such as dubstep, a little bit of hip-hop, dance music, all sorts of things. And she's been doing great in those genres, and she has millions and millions of followers and subscribers. While Lindsay Sterling does inspire a lot of young people to begin to play the violin in the first place, she partially inspired me to play in the first place. She doesn't necessarily promote classical playing as a career. On the other hand, Brett and Eddie have consistently made videos about classical music, and their audience has been growing around that. And although they do dabble a little bit in other genres, they mostly stick with classical music. The classical music world is very difficult to get into in the first place, which creates this aura of elitism and exclusivity. A lot of people who start playing instruments end up not continuing because of either the high cost or the difficulty of success in the classical music world. TwoSet allows for anyone anywhere to learn more about classical music on all different levels and even with different instruments for free. Their whole channel is free to watch. They openly share advice and insight into the classical music world, and Eddie even has a lot of informational videos and tutorials on his own personal channel. They're quite old, but they're actually really helpful. This makes classical music knowledge so much more accessible for people who can't afford it otherwise. They were also one of the pioneers of the classical music industry's online presence. In other words, they were basically some of the first people to grow the classical music community presence online, which wasn't really much of a presence until about 5 years ago when they started getting popular on YouTube and gaining a large following with their comedic and informational videos. They used their following to create a subreddit known as Ling 40 Hours on the popular networking app Reddit, which is known for its sub-communities as a forum-based social media. I also talked about this in my other video. Hilary Hahn was also one of the pioneers of the classical music community, particularly on Instagram and with practice accounts, which I personally have one myself. This occurred when she did her 100 Days of Practice challenge, and a bunch of people followed suit and created accounts and started sharing their music with each other. This brought many musicians to Instagram and allowed for them to connect with each other over large physical distances and share music through that platform. I personally have created friendships with a lot of people through Instagram, and we've never met each other before, but we talk so much on Instagram and we share so many similar experiences that it feels like a normal friendship. Next, TwoSet gives young classical musicians somebody to look up to as role models. They are both classically trained professional violinists that have a lot of insight into the classical music professional world. And they also have very high-level violin skills that is shown by them playing a new concerto every time they hit 1 million more subscribers. I think the next one is Sibelius. I'm excited for that. Not only are Brett and Eddie role models, but they also make themselves very relatable. They detail their constant struggle to practice and succeed in the cutthroat classical world that we see today, which most musicians also struggle with. They also allow for musicians of all different levels and different instruments to relate to them. And they also do a lot of teaching. They explain that certain techniques are more difficult than others on violin, and they talk about different things, and they even try out different instruments themselves, which I think is so cool that they do. TwoSet also collaborates with many well-known professional musicians and soloists, allowing their audience to see the personal and fun side of these otherwise extremely talented and amazing musicians. Notably, they collaborate a lot with Ray Chen and Hilary Hahn particularly. And Ray Chen is also kind of interesting because he has also built up his online presence and made himself so much more accessible to his fans through his creation of a Discord server and his YouTube. I think TwoSet has also encouraged many other professional musicians to explore this digital space and share their knowledge with the world. For example, Sumina Studer has been gaining quite the following on YouTube, and she does a little bit more lifestyle geared content, but it's still very violin heavy, which I think is really cool. And I'm sure that there's musicians in other instrument areas that have also been trying to get into this digital space. But I personally see it a lot with Instagram. There's a lot of new Instagram musicians, and there's now like classical music influencers, which is also just a whole interesting thing. But particularly with TwoSet, I think that they have been super impactful in changing the online classical music community in a good way. They've made classical music more accessible and classical music education more accessible for people who cannot afford it otherwise. They've created an online community that connects musicians from all over the world. They present themselves as role models, but also people that we can relate to as musicians. They've allowed us to connect with professional musicians and soloists that we would have otherwise not really had much connection with. And notably, they have destigmatized classical music and made it more inviting as a community and encouraged more people to pursue it further. TwoSet has been super critical in the recent promotion of classical music and trying to keep classical music alive. So I want to hit on something that I didn't really discuss very much in the rest of this video, but I think TwoSet could be even more impactful in the classical music world by promoting music by women composers, by Black composers, by Latinx composers, by LGBTQ plus composers. I think that there's still a lot of underrepresentation in terms of classical music, and programming is still mainly dominated by old white male composers and conductors who are creating those programs. So I think that TwoSet can really focus more on diversity in programming and in classical music, because that is really, really important. And I haven't really seen them talk about things like that very much. And maybe it's more of a serious topic, but I think that it's really important to acknowledge those things and to try to make progress within the classical music world. And that is one of the big issues with it at the moment. And TwoSet doesn't necessarily need to actually talk about these issues, because that's not really the focus of their channel. They're more comedic, more somewhat informational, but I think that they can definitely
encourage people to play more music by women composers, by Black composers, by Latinx composers, by LGBTQ plus composers, to play more of that music and deviate from the standard repertoire that is written by white male composers. I think that they can really focus on encouraging things like that and encouraging people to explore different music written by different people. There are so many composers out there that write great music or that have written great music and get very little recognition because of the color of their skin, because of their ethnicity, because of their gender. So I think that it's really important that TwoSet encourages diversity in programming, whether that is programming for an orchestra concert that a conductor chooses, or if a student wants to learn a new piece and they're thinking about doing something different from the standard repertoire. So I think TwoSet can definitely do a better job of that.
Please let me know in the comments your thoughts about TwoSet Violin and the classical music community at large, and whether you think classical music is dying or whether you think it is thriving, and how you think this pandemic has affected everything within classical music, because there's so many different discussions going on right now about the future of classical music and what things are going to change, both as a result of this pandemic
and as a result of the racial injustice that is currently present in the United States.
Please let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below, because I think it's super important to have these discussions. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. That'll let me know that you like more videos like these, and also feel free to subscribe. I make lots of content similar to this. Anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and make sure to go practice. Bye.